The Brown Girl in a Search of God Part 2. You have forgotten the Great One who gave you the 10 Commandments, without which your whole New Testament will be nothing. There is no greater prophet than him that the world has seen. Then a third man who stood on the eastern side put in a word, "You are all bluffing. The only true religion is that of the Vedas, and even your leaders were actually old Indians whose souls have transmigrated to your lands." The girls thought there would be a scuffle in a mute and they would go on each other's throats, so to avoid an unpleasant scene, they hastened to enter the portal. They however found their access barred by the diminutive size of the passage, when they heard a voice saying, "Bow your heads if you seek admission," and as soon as they had done so, the aperture widened itself to an enormous extent and they passed easily through. The moment they had stepped inside, a man approached to receive them. He had a book in his hand, the cover of which bore the title, Critique of Pure Reason. "I am glad you all three have come," he said courteously, but they could hardly find an answer as the scene that disclosed itself before their eyes amazed them utterly. They had expected some sort of enclosure or hall, but they could see no walls, no boundaries of any sort. It looked like a limitless expanse. Everything that they could possibly conceive met their view. Under their feet they found flower-laden pasture, blooms of all sorts which they had seen before, and those that they had never seen. An old banyan tree standing in the midst of its daughter trees that had grown out of its shoots was the nearest to them. Then there were ancient oaks by the ester of tremendous peepal and fig trees. Mangoes and Spanish chestnuts blended almost unrecognizably, and in the far distance there were towering palms, both in groves and singly growing. Here and there between the trees rose rocks of various forms and colors, some of them emitting perfumed steam and others spouting crystal water that formed pools around them which abounded with variegated fiery fishes, coral and pearl oysters. At the edges of the pools grew the lotus and the asphodel, while along the pastures the proud tulip and modest violet bloomed side by side. The oriental pearl jasmine mingled with the rustic daisy, and amidst them rose champak and syringa trees. All the woods and meadows were thronged with animals of all kinds, big and small, wonderful birds, golden beetles, and hundreds of butterflies and bees. Here and there in the clearest blue skies now and again clusters of clouds formed and dispersed. Now the south wind brought warmth and fragrance, and now the north came with refreshing coolness. Now the east wind and then the west wind blew, all caressing each other, and the most remarkable thing that the girls saw was that a continuous metamorphosis was in progress. Nothing seemed to remain the same, and no spot appeared twice in the same aspect. Hundreds of thousands of people, of all sorts and descriptions, from the deepest colored ebony to the most colorless albino with white hair and white eyebrows, that had collected there, were moving about on the lawns and under the trees that formed arches like aisles. Yet there was no feeling of overcrowding, and everyone seemed to have plenty of free space to move in, while mingled with the song of birds mysterious melodious music and sucd from the woods. Directly connected by a long passage with this space where the girls stood, they saw a spot sufficiently raised to be prominently in view. The ground there, instead of a green lawn, appeared blue like the sky, overstrewn with brilliant starry flakes providing the verisimilitude of the heavens, while the sky above Teacher's place appeared pearl white, softly and uniformly lit without dazzle, and seemed to reach an unlimited depth without changing its color. The girls saw that on this strange spot a number of people had collected. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. So far they had not moved a step from the entrance where they had been received. They were now startled by the voice of a man next to them, who said, "I believe that the only hope of humanity lies in art," and as the girls turned round, two of them recognized in the speaker the great German philosopher-poet. "There is great Goethe," said the brown girl, when another man with a long white beard replied, "Yes, and specially if it happens to be bad art." "No one can mistake him," said the black girl, "Feet is the great Russian." "What is the use of painting nude figures and composing sensual airs," continued the Russian with acrimony, "and writing vulgar poetry which only degrades humanity, especially when it is created with the clear purpose to stimulate the lower passions. I think my friend is correct, said the third, whom the brown girl recognized to be Plato, the son of Ariston, whose acquaintance she had already made. If I myself have found that most of the poets drag us down to Hades, he added. Yes, said another, who wore an Arab gown. But some of the poets pull us up to heaven, too, at least that is how I have been told and taught. The white girl, who had been introduced to this man by an American professor, knew him to be Ghazali, the Arabian philosopher. Yes, I agree, said the Russian. You all don't seem to realize that science is more valuable than art, said another, whom the brown girl knew to be Roger Bacon. I love science all the more, he added, because I learnt it from the Arabs with a great deal of trouble and just therefore was kept in prison for years. But look, he interrupted himself as two other men advanced towards them, here is Alhazan. While Gertie, recognizing the other man, added, and Newton. You are right, now, said the man who had received the girls at the gate. There is nothing like observing facts. You can't continually wait and wait for inspiration, but even knowledge gained by observation deals only with the phenomenon. You know as much as I do that the knowledge acquired through the senses does not disclose reality. You are on a sounder basis when you base your knowledge on pure reason. You are right, said the Arabian philosopher, but as you yourself found, reason itself is wanting. The rational no doubt is superior to the sensuous, but it is a real mistake to rule out any other form of superior knowledge than the rational. Probably there is one, in comparison to which rational knowledge itself might be found as defective as it is superior to the sensuous. So you see, my friend, reality is not behind one veil but behind many veils. Universal mind is the only reality that we call God. That is Hegel, whispered the white girl, listening attentively as he continued. And the spirit as it is driven back into itself finds itself separated from the infinite absolute essence, and that is fallen man. Ghazali turned to him and smiled, that way, not only universal mind but universal physique as well, we may call God, he remarked. As I mentioned before, reality lies behind many veils and what you call mind is only one of them. Indeed, the mental world itself is only one form of manifestation like the physical world, and there may be still further forms than mental. But what I really don't understand is your use of the word spirit. I agree with what you say about different forms of manifestation. I myself have felt like that, said a Jewish philosopher who was easily recognized as Spinoza. I am sure Master Maimonides thinks the same, he concluded, turning to a learned man at his side who smiled and said, no doubt, and two ancient Hindu philosophers, one of them being addressed as Bhadriana and the other as Kapila, also nodded assent, and Bhadriana said, yes, the illusion is created by more than one imposition. And Kapila added, indeed. Call it illusion or any science, it is all the same. Asterisk. After that a Chinese philosopher named Chuangzi spoke. All of you seem to lose SGHT of the fact that pure knowledge can only result from pure action and that both are inseparably related. That's a good reminder, cried the Russian Fioso, fair. That's what I have been saying all these days. When greed and consequent murder, which you call war, and all the unchristian acts are performed without the slightest compunction, what could art and science be? Let humanity first stop its outrageous conduct before it deserves to have purer knowledge. Yes, talking of knowledge when hundreds of thousands are being crushed under the heel, massacred and starved out of existence. But don't you see that no state can exist without thousands working under the heel, said a great Greek philosopher, whom they called Aristotle. People must be made to work and the working man cannot concern himself with virtue or knowledge. However adversely criticized, I stick to my opinion that slavery should be a permanent institution, but that slaves should be fed, and that every state necessarily must have trading and laboring classes, but of course, those cannot be expected to become virtuous. And I likewise still hold that this our earth is eternal, whatever others might say contrary to it. We want to do away with the idea of private property and make every man a workman, while you seem to think that the workman can have no part in virtue, said the Russian, and then Ghazali's voice was heard again. Yes, my friend, you are right, he said. We consider nobody virtuous unless he works, although I do agree so far with Aristotle that a slave might find it hard to become virtuous, because the first necessity for becoming so is to be free to act as one wishes. Freedom to act and right action make you virtuous. All very well about providing food and making people's lives easy, put in another man, but don't you think by your interference in economic matters you will breed a less fit type to survive, which otherwise would be excluded by the struggle of life? I see this is Herbert Spencer, said the white girl, and then they heard the name of Karapotkin, a Russian scholar, who said, mutual aid my friends, mutual aid, and not competition as you think, has been the keynote of civilization. Yes, remind him of that. Said a S+M voice, I almost feel like calling him names, his struggle for life he can never forget, and yet he cannot see the simple fact that the fitness of Merd is governed by different laws than fitness of the BCDY, that man is no longer only an animal. But these professors, just like their Greek masters, are all oceans of words, words, words. We want the winged word of a poet to enlighten us, he concluded, looking at Gertie. That is unmistakably Carlyle, said the white girl to her friends, and they all three passed on and went to another interesting group further D. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. As they came within earshot, they heard a young man, who seemed rapt with the beauty of the scene, exclaim. A thing of beauty is a joy forever. Its loveliness increases, it never fades into nothingness. Then he bowed to an elderly man dressed in Elizabethan costume who was approaching him and who remarked. These were wonderful words. And what of your wonders, said the young man with enthusiasm. Your words that the world can never cease to sing. How many times have I recited your lovely lines, for instance, men must endure their going hence even as t'bear coming hither, ripeness is a leer. If only the world could realize the meaning of these lines, and oh, how often has the grand truth of your wonderful words disclosed itself to me. Inconstancy falls off ere it begins. Then he continued almost in ecstasy. And your immortal lines. There is not the smallest orb which thou beholdest but in its motion like an angel sings. Still quirag to the youngest cherubims. Such harmony is in immortal souls. But whilst this muddy vesture of decay doth grossly close it in, we cannot hear it. And who has not realized the futility of this earth when reading the cloud-capped HTLLS, the gorgeous palaces, the solemn temples, the great globe itself? Yea, all which it inherit, shall dissolve. And like this insubstantial pageant, faded. Leave not a rack behind, we are such stuff as dreams are made of, and our little life is rounded by a sleep. Did you hear that, said the brown girl, we are told a different tale here than by Aristotle, who asserts that the earth is eternal. Then turning to the black girl she added, I remember that one of the curious ones you met had said that Shakespeare was quite godless, but you see, he is talking of religion, only in the latest form. Look, cried now the young enthusiastic poet, here comes my friend Schiller. I still remember his epigram, Earnest is life asterisk, and also his heroic, Maid of Orleans. The poet thus complimented, smiled and said gently, thank you, it is very good of you to mention trifles. I can see Milton there, said the brown girl, I recognize his ringlets. His blind eyes did not prevent him from seeing, and who can forget his sonnet on his own blindness? Indeed, added the white girl. Those also serve who only stand and wait. I believe that is Walt Whitman behind him, said the black girl. I do love his Leaves of Grass, and she began to recite. I swear I begin to see love with sweeter spasms than that which responds love. I swear I see what is better than to tell the bespit is always to leave the best untold. I don't know whether I would not rather prefer love that is responsive, said the white girl. Meanwhile Gertie and the great Russian and Ghazali joined the group, bringing a friend with themselves whom I Russian introduced to the others as Victor Hugo. This is the author of Les Miserables, a genuine work of art, he said, and then suddenly Gertie hailed two approaching men, calling out with delight, Kalidas. And also Vios, and shaking hands with them, he continued, turning to Kalidas, I have not yet forgotten the beautiful lines you make Sakuntala's lover say. She is God's vision of pure thought, composed in his creative mind, so plays my fancy when I see how great is God, how lovely she. Asterisk. Very kind of you to flatter me, said Kalidas smilingly, I thought I was too ancient to be of any interest. Schiller just then brought two ancient Greeks and said to Gertie, here is our Aeschylus and Euripides whom you love so much. Truly I do, said Gertie embracing them. And it was only as a token of admiration that I recast your Iphigenia, he said to Euripides. Then he beheld some more poets coming towards the group and he said, here is a whole batch of my old friends, the Muslim poets, Rumi, Hafiz, and the great lover Ibn Farid. He also saw one who had modestly remained behind and whom he could not recognize. Who is that? He asked. I do not seem to know him, but he has a wonderful face. Then welcoming these three he laid his hand upon Rumi's shoulder and looking into his eyes he said, it was you who set me to think of the metamorphosis of plants. What a new world was opened to me when I read your lines. Man appeared in the class of inorganic things, he passed therefrom into that of plants. For long he lived as one of them, then passed he from the vegetative state to that of animal, but not remembered his life as plant, except the inclination he felt towards them, specially at the season of spring and flowers sweet, then was man drawn from animal into the human state. Wherefore, then, fear that death will lower us. Maybe that when I die might appear as full-fledged angel. Rumi smiled and thanked his friend for the acknowledgement, and Gertie inquired from those present about the fourth, an unknown poet. Hearing this, the brown girl, who knew him came forward and told Gertie that he was called Latif, and that he deserved to be better known than he really was, and so saying she recited one of his couplets. Neither the control of desire nor the emotional abandonment concerns me any more. That is very interesting, said Gertie, do you know anything else of his? Whereupon the brown girl continued. Where no, and no, yes, no good and no evil exists. That still is within the reach of human idea. But where that beauty is, that we dote upon, no sight can reach there. Then she went on. I have so often remembered his verses in his dramatic poem called Seafarers, in which he says, see that you daily oil your little skiff, which is constantly exposed to water in the midst of which it stands. And those lines always remind me of yours in Faust, who after achieving his life work says, he alone earns freedom as well as life, who daily must win them anew. Splendid, said Gertie, I am longing to come in closer touch with him. The brown girl now noticed that Schiller stepped forward to meet three newcomers, one of them looking like an Oriental scholar. Welcome Montesquieu, Gibbon, he said. While the former introduced bis friend to him saying, I have no doubt that you know this great man, being a historian yourself. He is Ibn Khaldun, the great Arabian historian, and the father of the philosophy of history. This interested the brown girl immensely. She had heard of this wonderful man and it was a real joy to her to see him in person. Then she saw that Carlyle also had joined this group of historians and she heard the white girl say, look, how many people Gertie knows. Almost all the ancients as well as moderns. I love his lines to the brooklet, when he questions it wherefrom it came and whereto it was going, and the sweet simple answer of the brooklet. The one who has called me from the rock. He, I think, will be my guide. And the brown girl remarked, and not the lines in his divan today turned into an actual fact. He who knows himself and others here will also see that the East and West are brothers, parted ne'er shall be. "Come, let us make a move," said the black girl. By this time they had seen hundreds more of Occidental and Oriental poets, men and women, most of them very well-known faces to them. They all seemed entranced by the beauty of the scene. Now the throngs began to move forward towards the raised spot which seemed carpeted with the blue skies. And as they proceeded, the multitude grew bigger and bigger. A wonderful music reached them from all sides. One minute it was as if they heard a melody from the far-off blossoming cherry grove, what is called the music of the spring festival of the Chinese. Another time from the still further forest of shady banyan trees they heard the ancient ragas of Ind. Now again they seemed to hear Andalusian, now Italian strains. Then they could detect Bach and Mozart and again some gypsy gitanas, the very name of which connected their origin with the old Indian music. Between these came traveling on the southern breeze the crooning of spirituals, like so many sighs of human beings who could, as if, otherwise not express themselves. Now and again they even saw some of the greatest composers in company of other great artists and scientists. They saw martyrs who had sacrificed their lives for faith, for beauty, for goodness, or fighting tyranny, vice and disease. Most prominent amongst them stood the benefactors of the human race. The great humane kings and queens, administrators, and soldiers. And as they passed on, they came across throngs and throngs of saints, seers, and mystics, most of whom proceeded with calm silence as if their lips were sealed and their limbs moved as rhythmically as does the motion of breathing itself. IFC was amongst those that the brown girl with her friends came across the great Apostle Paul. They found him busy talking to someone whom they did not know. "I never did believe in Greek wisdom, he said. I always called it merely a show of wisdom rather than wisdom itself, but I do agree with Aristotle when he said that the northern nations know nothing but fighting. Is it not clear from the fact that even the Gentiles who were the most cultured amongst them and head and shoulders above others, could only represent their God by a spear? The Christian people who call God love indulge only in hate. Is it not strange that they worship Christ as a lamb and yet they delight to call themselves foxes, wolves, and lions? Such are also their insignia, either wolves, lions, or eagles, and they are proud of them and delight in them. I have heard that the greatest poet of the most advanced race amongst them is called Sheikh Spear, and in their allied race the greatest poet's Christian name is Wolfgang Star. Before these people became Christians, they used to wear bull's horns on their heads to frighten each other, and now they delight in wearing skulls and crossbones. What an irony that these people should still profess that their object of worship is love and the meek lamb. The girls were most interested in this talk, especially the white girl, who seemed to hear something she had never thought about before. Not far from them a host of distinguished Occidental and Oriental sages met their view. They were Thomas of Kempis, Swedenborg, Ibn Arabi, Suhawardi, Kabir and the great Nanak amongst them, and these were just the very few that the girls could recognize. Suddenly they realized that the elevated spot had disappeared from their view, and that the people whom they had seen collected there were directly in their midst almost shoulder to shoulder. "I know at least 3 or 4 of these," said the black girl, while the white girl's eyes beamed with a sudden joy. "Look," she cried. "There I see the God who came on earth to share and bear the result of our sin." But the brown girl was quite dumb and bewildered, because her whole life practically rose before her. She did not know at whom to gaze first, as she loved and honored so many of them intensely. With rapture she beheld the flute prince Krishna. There was the Pathfinder, the Nazarene, and the Messenger. She saw the great leader of Israel with his white flowing beard and Zarathustra the prophet of good and evil spirits, of whom she had just been able to catch a glimpse when leaving for Ind. She spied the great Manna, who had been their first guide after their arrival in Ind. On the other side she saw the 2 men Lao Tzu and Confucius she had met in the cherry blossom grove, and she saw the wise Greek Socrates who had taught How to argue, together with Akhenaten whom she had met in the land of the crocodile. She also saw Solomon the beautiful prince of the vineyard and hundreds of others, some of whom she had a dim recollection of, and others which she did not know at all. The remarkable thing was that although these people were in one way directly amongst them, still they seemed to be lifted entirely above them, and every word they spoke seemed to reach to the other end of space without any help of radio or microphone. They conversed only amongst themselves and did not address the multitude which had converged to this spot from all directions and was not at a standstill and seated on the skiey meadow. "It fell to your province to make such a meeting as this possible on earth," said Zarathustra to the messenger, and the Nazarene faintly smiled and said, "Yes, human beings still remain perverse children," and turning to the leader of Israel, he continued, "When you emphasize that prophets will come after you, they would point-blank refuse to accept anyone that actually followed, and when I said that I would send them a comforter, they expected that an angel with wings should appear amongst them, but to no human being would they lend their ears. And when the messenger told them that they had to believe in all prophets and in all books, those that were mentioned to them, and even in those that were not mentioned, and that no other prophet they need wait for, they would insist that he could not be the last, but that there should still come many more. They delight in perversity. If you want them to believe one thing, just say the other, if it were only possible for us to do that." "Yes," said Krishna in a hilarious tone, "they are worshipping most of us, but they don't know what they worship in us." The worst mischief always arises from the people who profess to be one's followers. It almost reminds one of the saying, "Save me from my friends." The greater the wonder, that, with all that, the law still works and even turns the ignorance and folly to its use as if necessary coefficients of the scheme, said the Pathfinder. They insist that there should be no mystery. Tell them as much as you like that mystery must and has to remain till you are capable to see all. But what is the use? You may appoint very learned professors to teach a child, but what can the child learn beyond the ABC? All else can only be hinted at and made fairy tales out of, which may carry some sense to the child. Frighten him with hobgoblins and promise him visits from the fortune fairy. They double question about certain things, and when one tells them what at all they can possibly understand, they cry out, "That is not possible." Like the toad that could not believe that the ocean was bigger than his well. The worst type are those, said Akhenaten, who call themselves the leaders of the people and then deliberately hide the truth. It would be excusable if they did it for the benefit of those whom they lead, but it is always for their own benefit. I have bitter experiences of the priests. Don't remind me of them, said the great leader of the Israelites. Well, I suppose they think the best way to lead the flock is to waylay them, and the best way to feed them is to feed upon them, said the Nazarene. Haven't they made me a perfect householder, the very emblem of procreation? They saw nothing in me but the upholder of the family and childbirth. Yes, said Zarathustra. And when I introduced the institution of family as a sacred thing and would insist on it, they affected nomadism. That has been the fate of most of us, said the Pathfinder, turning to the Nazarene. You, my brother, taught love and meekness, and I positively dissuaded them from worshipping their gods, and now you can watch your and my followers and see for yourselves what has happened. Indeed, said the Nazarene, the latest development amongst them is that my teaching to give up property is being interpreted by a certain class as, hand over your property to us, it is unchristian that you should possess it. Everyone conveniently forgets that every individual himself was to give up his property, not to ask someone else to hand over his to him. They quote my saying that the rich will not go to heaven * to those who are rich, but in their own case they yearn to become rich, because, I suppose, they despise to go to heaven themselves. Oh well, said the messenger, we have done our jobs and obeyed the command. It is lucky that we were not constituted their guardians. He that made us and them knows his business best. I suppose even discord and differences must be, as we all know. I could also sing a song of my followers who have begun to believe in everything exactly the opposite to what I taught them to believe. You see, my loved brother, he went on, turning to the Nazarene, a thing that you clearly mentioned and I repeated ad nauseam, they have actually turned upside down. Struggle of life, * that is how they call it. As if you had not said that the righteous shall inherit the earth, And as if I had not repeated that as soon as they deviated from the eternal law and were not exactly in line with it, the command will be, away with these unjust people, and someone else better and fitter shall take their place, as if the survival of the fittest were a new idea. How completely they have forgotten your teaching that the less you consider yourself fit, the more fit you are to survive. They cannot be made to understand that man's fitness lies in making the unfit one fit to exist. It is everywhere the same, said Confucius. I mentioned to my people not to worry about worshipping spirits of their ancestors, and that is a long time ago, but still today it is exactly the same. They do what they did thousands of years ago, while my friend Lao Tzu spoke to them like my honored friend the Pathfinder, of the way, and like my esteemed friend the Nazarene, of returning good for evil, but no one even has cared to understand him. The only thing they do is to fill up their temples with stone images of real and imaginary pathfinders running into thousands and worship them, without troubling to find out, as my noble friend Krishna said, what they really worship in them. The very mention of the fact that I had received a voice directing me, brought me a cup of poison, said Socrates. But that is of little account. Poison does not hurt. If they had only taken some notice of what I said, but that was not to be, and in a short time they themselves had disappeared. The worst that has taken place in my land is that those teachings of mine, which were only meant for a certain period, are still stuck to, said Manu. People can never realize what my brother the messenger has clearly taught, that every period had a book, and that a thing that is necessary and beneficial at one time begins to be a hindrance and an obstruction at the other. That stability itself easily passes into stagnation and stagnation into death, just as the followers of my friend, the leader of the Israelites, thought that our Nazarene was trying to subvert their religion, so the Brahmins still think that the great Pathfinder was only a demon that had come to destroy their gods and religion. They still stick to their caste system as if this was meant to be a law for all times, never to be changed. For thousands of years they have kept their idols as their personal property, and still resent other people sharing them. They still cannot see that all these things had their uses for a time and that they have now become a positive hindrance in the way of their advancement and progress. The same with the sacred cow. Since the Pathfinder brought the whole animal world in relationship to man, and since his relationship is scientifically established, of what use is the recognition of relationship of one animal today? However useful an animal may be from material point of view, it has no more that spiritual value which at one time it possessed. Still they would insist on keeping up the old rites and rituals. The greatest need of that country is an iconoclast to destroy the out-of-date and unprofitable forms. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. That is so, said Zarathustra. Man even now cannot sufficiently realize that what he was asked to do had not only an immediate purpose, but far-reaching effects. For example, the man that I addressed in my time was still very near his brother animal. He did not only roam aimlessly and hated any settled condition or responsibility, but was incapable of paying attention to anything. His infant mind, which was just born and was not sufficiently conscious, was not able to fix its attention on anything for long. The man roamed and his mind wandered. One his greatest necessity was to train it to attend to objects and not to flit about. Fire at that period was the most necessary and therefore the most desirable thing, a boon newly acquired and difficult to kindle. To let man watch it and not let it go out was made a religious duty. The immediate result that it was to achieve was to teach the infant plus mind to attend. The owning of land and its culture was the second method. Its object was through calling things my own to create the mine. The tea was just emerging and mine was to augment it. Also the bull, the most necessary helper of man to plough his land tied by self-interest to him, was the best to teach him at that period that the animal world was related to him. That he was a part of the same world to which the animal belonged. Thus, the holy bull, the eternal fire, the land culture and personal property, became the greatest tools of creating his individuality, that is, his mind as an entity in itself and by itself. Up to this time taboo was the only inhibitive force in human life. This was generalized by me and raised to a moral system with two opposites, good and evil, so that the permanent centers of inhibition be formed in the very body of man to restrict the old unhindered reflex activities and the waste of energy they entailed, and allow new grooves of activity to be formed. I cannot see how it is not yet clear to man that not the conditions that was set on BIM were important in themselves or unchangeable, but that the purpose they were for rect caret to achieve, was all important. Although you all already know what I sag asterisk does one good to speak some aims of the part L caret at onk was graciously assigned to play. You are right my brother, said Manu. Caret was your great task to draw man's notice from JTF 118110118 objects to the abstract powers. Those that left your country irritated by yo caret are el nuo, vation, not grown up enough to conceive non-Yelsus objects and powers, arrived themselves in Tim 5 at same stage, and it was assigned to me to mark caret et asterisk em understand the three abstract powers of creating, preserving and destroying. The strictest ritual had to be installed to disc asterisk p caret nc the mind, and the nobility of ploughing, that, ou asterisk iac asterisk yourself taught, had to be established to di caret asterisk 11 caret won them from the nomads or irresponsible men. J0M asterisk family life had to be created to enlarge the SP caret EIE degree relationships. Side by side it was also my duty to phi /up casks i.e., hereditary specialization of functions in a koi asterisk 111111111 caret. This was necessary at this period because the CA faculty caret of the individual being then very limited, it was necessary in the interest of communal life and efficiency to carry on, to create specialized hereditary disposit, degree NS or certain tasks. The trouble was, as I said before, that even when these three generalized abstract powers were given to them for worship, still most of them could not grasp these and carried on with the nature powers as objects caret of worship. So with all the addition of advanced forms, lower forms persisted, and the attention of the mind to its own detriment remained divided between them. My task, as you know, was almost similar to yours, said Moses, the leader of the Israelites, with this difference, that its main significance lay in forming a larger social and political unit and the discipline provided for that, and at the same time as far as possible to lift men above the worship of sensuous objects. Their energy was just adequate to attend to this particular special purpose, and as the mind had not yet come to a standard to attach any importance to any other existence than life on this earth, it was not for me to emphasize any other life. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. When I came on earth, said Krishna, these rituals and moral laws had already borne fruit. The mind had grown capable of attention and observation. The regulation of energy by inhibitions had produced surplus which was finding new channels of expenditure. The man was ready to delight in pure acts of perception without seeking any particular practical end. The objects which man had formerly worshipped before, he now felt actually attracted to, recognizing a quality in them that he called beauty, and he felt a subconscious relationship with them. It was my task specially to augment this function of the mind. I was also commanded to defend better stocks against the attacks of the lowest kinds who were called Rakshasas because they were physically stronger and were able to destroy much more evolved people than themselves. I was also to provide and encourage the greatest need of the earth at that time, that is, of propagating and breeding the finer stocks. Personally, I had no need even of aesthetic life, which I had to live through for the sake of others, but the householder's life in which I had to have hundreds of queens and to arrange the bringing up of children, that was a task which almost taxed even my patience. But it was commanded and it had to be done, as you all know, that is our life. Our life is not to live like the ordinary man by the guidance of pleasure and pain, but to do what we are commanded to do. 7/7 utter obedience lies our greatest bliss. The activity one way or the other can possess no attraction for us. That is only mechanically performed. Tmeen feeling has no hand in it. That was also the particular period in which the leadership, political and religious, had united in one individual, passing on from the priest class to the prince class. Yes, said the messenger, it was your privilege to be the first blossom on the tree of humanity. I was just going to say that, said Solomon, the vineyard prince, because in my peoples, my father and I represented the same phase. It is not only a coincidence that a song is attributed to Krishna as well as to me, or that he was fond of the flute and I was fond of the harp as my father, or that we both could understand and interpret what is so grossly misrepresented by our followers, the language of nature. People thought that the ant should speak to me in human language, not in ant's language, and they still are discussing the point. My mission, too, was to augment aesthetics, perceptive life and also the analogous tasks of helping the preservation of humankind by propagation, and defense against wilder stocks who spent all their energy in physical action, and like my brother Krishna, I had to incur multimarriage and encourage that in others. I confess, said Socrates, that my task was not so attractive, but I felt no less the joy to have been the recipient of the glorious voice that came to me. As it happened, the mind of man was just reaching that age at which its greatest need is a gymnasium for exercise and play to fit it for serious future business. The purpose of the age was to found the gymnasium for the mind. The very fact that ideals * were being talked about as more important than objects, was only to introduce the growing mind that was just old enough to play. Although the life still mainly expressed itself in physical and physiological terms. Psyche in reality was yet a myth. So much criticism has been leveled against this period by the world. Some admiring it beyond all proportion as the age of the greatest wisdom, and others running it down as the age of shallow talks, useless argumentation, and sophistry. Very few have been able to detect its special function that it was to perform, in the growth of the mind. Indeed, it was the age of argumentation and sophists, but that was actually its purpose. There is also no end of talk about the position of woman at that time, this they discuss in the same spirit. They imagine that woman sprang out of the head of the Creator, fully grown and panoplied on the day of creation, and was to remain so in the same condition without change up to the day of resurrection. So they naturally ask, what was the position of women? They cannot think that the position of women had to undergo constant change, like everything else, that women's growth was along the same lines from stage to stage as that of whole nature, and that of man himself. Do they ever ask what was the position of men? Even, in my time 80% of them were slaves, worse off than women. They forget man himself had been a child and a bad one at that. As my friend Zarathustra said, in his time, he could not have dreamt of suggesting anything but one man's rule with a rod in hand, even if it be called a scepter, whether in a family or in a state, the discipline had to be strict, as no molding is done without fire and hammering. Woman is admittedly the last product. By woman I mean the female or that which conceives as a passive subject. The active motive power undoubtedly precedes it. The last form of this subjective passive receiver on earth is woman. That presages for her the last word, but, therefore, she was also to ripen later, as my friend the messenger has rightly said, that towards the end of the world, the proportion of women will be tremendously in excess than it is at present. Pure subjectivity is naturally the last word in creation. The violence of motion must go on decreasing if ever the equilibration is to be reached. As my friend the messenger clearly has said in the last revealed book, the creation starts by motion and ends by equilibration. The very condition of the soul, that he describes as the end of man on this earth, is when it has reached harmony and peace without a discord, and moves harmoniously and equipoised to its goal. This controversy about woman and her position is foolishly conceived and follows on an insufficient basis. This reminds me also of polygamy. As has been mentioned before, the begetting of children was the supremest duty of man, and the very fact that the infancy of woman was chosen for that period as the fittest coexistent, should give man a peep in the divine scheme and bow it works. Polygamy and begetting of children begins to be less necessary, in proportion that woman is growing and finding her individuality. But the most amusing part is that the colorblind common herd of the world thinks that the leaders of men who had to live the life of the times in which they had to act and to incur multimarriage as a pure duty for different reasons, personally enjoyed that experience. People will never understand that even a man who is capable of genuine aesthetic experience, delights in that experience so much more that he finds physical relationships gross and insufferable. That is as far as the aesthete is concerned, whose mind has just begun to feel and perceive. But what about those who have grown-up minds and are capable of having the deepest conscious look into the very heart of nature and are therefore sources of profound revelation? The common herd thinks that it is a joy for those to live in physical relationships and enjoy them, what they call passionate life and what they themselves enjoy for want of having any mental life. But t to the power of n, the very attempt to make them understand is foolish. It is like teaching color perception to the colorblind, which cannot be done. Likewise, prattle continues on about poets and their position in human society. A poet reflects life. There are some poets who see only the lowest of life and why express it in a feeling form. These are reckless fools who run headlong downhill and carry the crowd with themselves. Is it a wonder then that in all the ages the leaders of men have warned the people against this danger? It is certainly right to say that the state of every period is judged by two circumstances. First, what the man thinks of himself, and second, what he thinks of his God. I have already to some extent told you what the man thought of himself at my time, and as to his God, you know that he still worshipped the nature gods. I could not do more at that time but just hint that there seemed to be a universal power above all these. But to return to my main theme, I repeat that my mission was to establish the gymnasium for the mind in which it was to exercise itself to get ready for the future work in front of it. All honor to you, my friend, said the messenger. It was not in vain that in the last book of Revelation, one whole chapter is entitled after your people's name, only to direct the world's attention to your exercising ground. At the time when I appeared in my peoples, said Confucius, they like all others at that period had too much concentrated on the service of ancestor spirits, but were sadly wanting in the way of right action. It was not so much to wake up their cognition that was my task, as to regulate their action and direct it into fruitful channels, specially politically. Different peoples in the world have been differently fitted by nature, for particular ends, and they are chosen to lead at those particular periods. For example, the people of the land to which my noble friend the Pathfinder belongs, have a predilection for cognizing things, while my people's province in general is action, not that one can do without the other, it is only a matter of difference of proportion. That is the reason why at no time have they worshipped a wine god. Most people do realize that everything in its place and season is useful. The same is the case with wine. To make an ordinary knife you have to heat the iron in the fire and beat it. Likewise the mind had to pass through the period of violent emotion and passion. Righteous passion was the mainspring of beneficial action, the quality that my friend Krishna calls rajas. At that time the solemn partaking of wine was just the thing to augment that condition, and wine was worshipped as God, as were worshipped other beneficial nature powers that helped man. But supposing a knife that is formed and ground is passed once more through the fire, what will the fire and hammering do but destroy it? The people, however, insist that either wine was useful to humanity once for all, or it was bad from the very beginning, and they cannot grasp that everything is bound up with its time and place. Likewise it is amusing to hear people talk about the color difference in humanity. They conveniently forget that there was a time when the dark color was adored. The best examples I can give you are our two most loved brothers, the Flute Prince and the Vineyard Prince, most beautiful and most adored by human beings themselves. They both in their time were called black. Dark was the color that expressed that passion which was the supremest quality then. The passion that produced aesthetics and art, the passion that had the first peep into nature's beauty and gave beauty to the world. They, too, forget that the dark beauty has been sung and sung by poets through all ages. I hear the Persian Pset Hafiz, being fair himself, has lines to his credit in which he speaks about the black-skinned one on whom depends the sweetness of the world. This he says of his beloved. Even the head of the Anglo-Saxon poets still dotes on the dark beauty. I have often wondered why the moderns don't call the black grape, that stores most of the sun, ugly. No doubt in certain respects the special beauty of the black has for the time being lived itself out, because passion and wine are themselves today at a discount, and it has to be so. At present, the element in which the mind acts has to be the most unemotional and entirely free from passion. Anything that disturbs that, is undoubtedly, as my brother the Pathfinder said and the Messenger emphasized, a detrimental factor. But it must not be forgotten that the black is therefore disposed to act in the line of the greatest resistance, especially when it is being tempted with wine, and is therefore sublimating, and the time will come when the pressure will have shaped it into a diamond for the highest ends. Everything has its time. Great nature makes use of everything at its proper season when it is ripe for use. How ignorant is the man who thinks that he is exclusively the best only because he happens to be the subject of use at a particular time as the white is now. To return to our subject, when Homer and Soma, and Dionysus, those wine gods, were objects of worship, even then, as I have already said, my people had no wine god, because action was already their special characteristic. But very recently they easily fell prey to opium when it was offered to them, because it was a quietening agent providing the opposite side of their nature. The characteristic of the people I lived amongst being action, my task was to regulate and direct that action, while my friend Lao Tzu provided suggestions for introspection. So we were in a sense complementary to each other. It was now that the brown girl saw that the great Pathfinder, who had sat calmly with his eyes closed and a suggestion of a smile on his lips, gently looked up and began to speak. "This rumination has been really delightful," he said. "It has brought to my mind all the stages that I passed myself as an individual. The mind of man had a wonderful breeding. It is not generally understood that the evolution of the individual human and human groups, and later of the whole humanity as one family, proceeded in a peculiar way. For example, even in the land in which I received birth, at the time when worship of a family god and strictest ritual was and could be the only form of revealed religion, there existed rare individuals who were far advanced on the path, but they were not even supposed either to carry the message to the masses or disclose their experience. And when the last message declared for the whole earth a universal author and God, there are human beings who are still at the lowest stage of family god worship, and some at tribal god worship, and can see no good outside their own tribe, while most of men bow at the altar of a national god with a national morality. The most noteworthy point is that as soon as a message is revealed and a certain stage is authoritatively initiated, it becomes a sin to traduce its behest and act contrary to it, from that period onward. What we call sin is undoubtedly the determinant factor in survival and the future life of an individual or a group. The pity is, that most times men interest themselves more in the person of the teacher than his message. That breeds confusion. That very thing happened in my case. Men interested themselves in all personal incidents of my life and concluded that in a sense, search of happiness was my aim. They could not even read in my life story the fact that the feeling of discontent, which is unhappiness itself, had proved the most potent factor in my life. But for that unhappiness, would I have sought anything at all? So, unhappiness after all is not so bad. This fact, even to be modern man, never seems to get clear. The unconscious mind Tibat had begun to act subconsciously in aestheticism was now to grow fully conscious of self and the other, and that consciousness could never be acquired without the assistance of disappointment, discontent and pain. The overemphasis that was laid, and necessarily laid, at earlier stages on ritual, external forms and ceremony, propagation of species, personal possessions, had all done their work and had to be reacted. The time had arrived that the human mind which had learnt reverential attention was to learn concentration, and instead of creating more stray relationships, could advance further only by entire detachment and introspection away from every external object. In one word, enter the pupa stage. I was to initiate this chrysalis stage of the mind in the East as my honored brother the Nazarene was to do a little later in the West. That which was called the Aryan path at one time, was now in comparison with this new initiated stage, like wandering in the labyrinthine wood of ceremonies and relationships, and losing oneself in them, and was literally the Aryan or nomad way. The mine asterisk that originally had been the source of ego building was now hindering the further development of the ego, which was more or less identified with body and external relationship. It was no more necessary to cultivate the land or cultivate relationships, but cultivate self. This initiation concerned the individual as individual, and the universal only as was reflected in and for the particular, but not groups and masses as such and their interrelations. It dealt with the individual, mind in detachment star. To make the mind fully conscious of self, the expression had to be antithetical. Every act that was not consciously conceived and willed by the mind, that is, intentionally performed, for the purification of the mind itself, was to be inhibited and discounted. Form and routine were to be considered poisonous. Because complete self-consciousness of the mind as an entity was the sole aim. This was the only way how the mind could emerge full-fledged like a butterfly for future action. I even had to stop the worship of gods, because it was all a routine with my people. Besides, it divided man's mind between so many objects. Likewise, I had to dissuade them from concerning themselves with a life beyond, because they were already too much concerned with it in a wrong way, conceiving it as a continuation of this life of pleasure. This false perspective was disturbing their view of the new relationship for which the mind was being prepared and which required every bit of their energy. As you all know, a great deal more could be said about this stage, which itself, more than any other, implied that unless the mind sets to realize the meaning of things and purifies and advances its own self, external forms or outside help could be of no use to it. My mission and work were analogous to that of my brother the Pathfinder, said the Nazarene *. He, too, like me, had to wander in body and appear like a nomad, and detach himself from hearth and home and relationships of all kinds. He had to carry nothing, possess nothing but his alms bowl. It was not necessary for him, but it was necessary for his mission. The same with me. I plainly told my people that I had come to destroy their homes, and their relationships, and separate the father from the child, and the child from the mother. I told them that unless they detached themselves from hearth gods, corn gods, family gods on one hand, and the external form and absorption in life on the earth, on the other hand, they could not be able to receive what was my message. I was to draw the attention of the Israelites, contrary to my brother the Pathfinder, to the future life, because unlike the Pathfinder's people, they had never thought of that at all. The expression of my mission had also to be in an antithetical from. I had to create a reaction against what they stuck to so obstinately. Their particularness about the routine, and the value they attached to observance of ceremony and form was such that I had to insist upon the contrary. So much attention was paid to trivial external actions and form, that I even had to make the beneficial external actions appear valueless, because detachment and concentration only on the mind activity was of essence. I plainly told them that if they committed adultery with the mind, even if their body did not partake in the sin, still the sin was there. They were so set on retaliating any wrong done to them that I had to react it by asking them to turn the other cheek. Also, as the West knew nothing else but fighting amongst themselves, I had to give the special message of love. But these were all incidentals, not the essentials of my mission. These only conduced to remove preliminary hindrances that obstructed the entrance to the way. With these local differences, the essence of my mission was exactly the same as that of my brother the Pathfinder in the East, namely, to initiate the mind to enter on the pupa stage, and make it realize its individual conscious life distinct from that of the body. You cannot build a larger life without destroying the smaller first. To belong to the household of God necessitated the breaking of blood relationships. The regard for ancestors and genealogies was so persistent that God had to be mentioned in the same relationship of a father, only that recognizing this they might pay less regard to their worldly ancestors. One was concerned only with the individual, exactly as my brother the Pathfinder. I was not to deal with the life of the masses as such, neither their political nor their social life was my objective. It was to prepare each mind as an individuality for its new life. That was my chief task. It was, therefore, that when I asked about things concerning social, political and family life, I always displayed unconcern. Man as an end in himself was the way my mission in was to deal with him, and, he continued, turning to Moses, the leader of the Israelites, I plainly told them that I had not come to destroy that which was already theirs, because without that this new teaching would have been impossible, but that the form and ritual that had been taught to them had abundantly done their work and were proving a hindrance. They had learnt their lesson by heart over and over, and without the second, there was no progress possible. My honored friends, said the messenger, to me this our meeting on earth has been a source of great joy, as you can easily understand. If not for any other reason, at least for this, that it fell to my lot to bring the message, that such a meeting was absolutely necessary for the further advance of man. This also explains my special mission, which is that it does not bring anything new to man, but says all what has been said before. But for you all, my message would not exist. I was only to repeat your expressions. But the combination of all these expressions in due proportion has opened an entirely new perspective to man. This present form as a synthesis, the summing up, in which all the particular messages are concluded and harmonized as parts of one whole, that was my mission. The last revelation, therefore, insists that there has been no religions but one religion. It declares man to be an adult. Yes, he continued, turning to the Pathfinder and the Nazarene, man having passed, owing to your kindness, through the pupa stage, has reached his majority, and he is made responsible as an individual, man and woman alike, and the privilege of freedom of choice has been conferred upon him and her. No action, as you said, even in the pupa stage, had any value for them, unless it was intuitional, and the mind had consciously willed it. The detachment that you insisted upon for development of an independent individuality, and without which the mind, as a free agent could never come into existence, is still as important as you made it, the only difference being, that armed with that detachment of individuality, man is to consider himself a part of the universal whole, not of those partial wholes and relationships from which the detachment of the pupa stages was to rescue him. Family, neighbor, nation, all these are still there, but he has to live and act only for the universal as such, which is his real origin and which will be his home. The last message reconfirms the ideal of ancestor worship and home and hearth worship, with the difference that only the real ancestor and the true home have been made the objects of worship. It sums up the whole position by the words, from God we are and to God we return. As you, my loved friend Nazarene, said that you came not to destroy BNT to confirm, so I had come to confirm every particle that was, is, and will be. Man has really worshipped his ancestors all the time. Whether in his fathers, or animals, whether in trees, water or clay, whether in sun, the moon, Venena, or Iha, it has been all ancestral worship. Only man's vision could not reach the true ancestor of all things and their real home. The man was young and the woman younger. The last revelation also retains their link with nature, which in form of so many distinct objects they worshipped. It directs the mind to observation and loving study of nature as a manifestation of one and the same object to whom such a study would lead man, and the deeper the peep is, the greater the bliss. Most men are concerned with happiness, but you, my honored brother, have already explained to them that happiness is not a thing to be sought in itself, because it is not a thing but a state, concomitant of certain conditions. It comes unasked as soon as those conditions are fulfilled, and the state which accompanies the greatest bliss is the true realization by man of his origin and home. Has he not felt that the highest joy comes to him only in moments of recognition, whether aesthetic or intellectual? It is, therefore, that the last revelation says that the greatest bliss lies in the approach and vision of him towards whom the whole universe moves, and in the finding of whom the entire universe has found its purpose and permanent rest. The words in which it describes this are that the creation is motion, destined and directed, and its equilibration lies in its return to what it originated from. That which hinders it to reach this balance is what is called sin or evil, and that which favors its progress in right and destined direction is good. It is also out of this balancing that justice comes into existence. Human knowledge of the deity has developed also step by step. At all times, even when man owned more gods than one, each person, family or group, always had only one favorite god, which they called their god. So in a sense monotheism has been always the religion of man. The last revelation, however, does not speak of one god or monotheism. It simply s*** ys, God, not one or two or three, as God is not subject to numbers, but is beyond them. Still, man's counting cannot be despised. It is God-given. It helps h greater than m to understand creation. Because, as we all know, creation is motion, and motion has its quantitative aspect. As soon as matter, which is only a form of motion, evaporates into immaterial forms, only quantitative knowledge of it is possible to him. Until he gets nearer to reality beyond the instrumentality of what he calls mind. Man, after worshipping natural objects, rose to worship ideal forms, as my friend Socrates knows very well. Ideal forms were made objects of adoration by man, but once again, he went on, turning to manner and the Pathfinder, each ideal attribute begged to be embodied and represented into a separate personal god, because at that period the young mind could only grasp one attribute at a time. The three godheads that my friend Jmana gave to his people he knew to be three attributes of the manifested God, namely, the creative, the sustaining and the equilibrating, or all-leveling, which in a crude form is put down as the destroying star. Each attribute itself was worshipped in form of a god. It is a wonder that for so many centuries, people have not found out that Brahma meaning power and Shiva meaning merciful *, while Vishnu meaning the all-pervading and sustaining, are mentioned as attributes of God in the first line of the last revelation. My beautiful friend Krishna here is supposed to have incarnated the third attribute, viz., the sustaining element. In him that particular attribute of the divine found expression, so is Vishnu himself the embodiment of ideal attribute which belongs to manifestation itself. But the real is beyond them all. The last revelation suggests almost 100 of such attributes of God as the generalizations of the manifestation and puts them down for realization by man himself, necessary for an approach to the deity. When man has realized these attributes in himself, it is only then that man mirrors and represents the manifestation. For example, kingship. The last revelation makes this a divine attribute. This merely means that it requires that each individual man and woman should realize in him and herself kingship, and instead of one king in a million, all men and women should become potential kings and queens, and possess qualities that an ideal ruler stands for. All attributes of the manifestation have to be thus realized in each individual. Brahma, Shiva, and Vishnu have to be realized in man himself. For those that desire to know more, the book itself is there. Certain other ideals, like ancestor and home, have persisted throughout human experience, because they have had intrinsic value for man. Light is one of these. From the beginning, in one sense or the other, light has been looked upon as a representation of the divine. In fact, the name that most peoples gave to God originated from my root word, meaning light star. My dear brother Zarathustra here emphasized that form, and the whole development has been once more confirmed in the last revelation in a more comprehensive and transcendental way, and the connotations of fire and light have been explained to those who can possibly understand them. It is thus that this message sums up every aspect that entered in all the messages delivered before it. The messages delivered from time to time were disseminated through the instrumentality of different classes of persons at different periods. The first was the priest, then the prince or soldier. The last revelation specially included the trader and worker. The traveling trader was to carry the message and at the same time create interrelationships between different peoples. It was also, therefore, that in the last dispensation, traveling for so many purposes was suggested as the best teacher of man. But the type that it eulogizes most is that of the worker. All useful labor that conducts to the realization of the eternal purpose of man, it makes direct service and worship for God. Every insignificant act of man when performed with the intention to assist the universal purpose, is itself the best form of worship. The distinction of sacred and profane, or the pleasant and the painful that had been necessary and natural for an antithesis when the mind was entering the pupa stage and the dualism it created, is once again made to disappear by a universal synthesis. There is nothing profane in itself so long as it is willed to serve the divine purpose. Nor is the unpleasant to be necessarily adopted and the pleasant to be avoided. The aim of the antithesis was only to create the capacity, so that when the apparently pleasant was detrimental to the purpose, it could easily be controlled and eschewed and the unpleasant adopted instead. Likewise, the retirement from the world which had become the rule in the East and the West after the initiation of the pupa stage, was no more necessary. A certain sort of retirement is still suggested, but is meant only to be a preparation for synthetic universal life. Those who cannot understand this, have an example in the lives of all of us here, for even the Pathfinder and the Great Nazarene had to pass through retirement like myself, but only as a preparation for future work. We all practically to the last day on earth actively worked in the world. Therefore, it does away with the retirement from the world in the old sense. Man has to love all things, as things of God, and must act for that love's sake in the world till to the last moment of his life. This message also necessarily includes faith in the unseen. It is amusing to hear some people who will have no blind faith star. As if the word faith itself did not imply belief in things not experienced before. The entire system of revealed religion was based on belief in things on authority of those that knew, and following them till or realized them for one's own self. But for that belief which in other words you call faith, the world would not have come so far, and but for faith still, till the world has realized all, it must perforce stand still and perish. Hardly were these words uttered when everything, including her companions, had vanished from the brown girl's view. Instead, she saw the heavy folds of history's gown. WLRCH began to shrink by and by till history himself stood before her. "Here we are back again," he said smilingly. "I hope you enjoyed poor ramble. I have only given you a peep at one fold of my gown. I hope you saw how the whole of humanity has been moving from stage to a veil-defined destination. I'll just remind you of the most interesting features of your afternoon walk. You could not have failed to note the thesis of what is called religion formulated by Zarathustra and developed by others, also its antithesis and likewise its synthesis. Nor could you have missed to notice that the main task of revealed religion has been to play the nurse, the governess, and the teacher of the human mind. It provided its needs in its infancy and early growth, it equipped its nursery and its gymnasium, then it looked to its education and discipline, lastly it inaugurated its coming of age and furnished it with directions for its further progress to bring about consummation and a new birth. The other main features that you must have mankind during your swift journey, I suppose, you would call culture and civilization. Very few men have understood that they are entirely distinct entities, however related and interdependent. Culture deals with the individual as such, the unit of humanity, while civilization deals with combinations and groups of these individuals and their joint life. I need hardly say that these combinations depend upon the quality of the units. On the other hand, the group life puts to test the culture of the human individual and furnishes it with a field to practice his lesson and consolidate his achievements. It also indirectly increases his capacity for creating harmonious relations with a larger and larger group, till he is capable of comprehending the whole and living harmoniously as a part of it. You saw Zarathustra, Manu, and Moses. These are representative teachers of civilization. Zarathustra initiated family life. Manu joint family life and village community, and Moses, the leader of the Israelites, was the first to provide requisites for a national life to. Thanks for watching.